Okay, try to imagine this. The Seshachalam forest, deep in the night, April 7th, 2015. It's humid, you can almost hear the insects, maybe leaves rustling. That real deep forest quiet.
Uh-huh. That kind of stillness that feels ancient.
Exactly. And then just suddenly, shattering that quiet gunfire, automatic weapons.
Wow. Yeah, that contrast it's jarring. Violence erupting in that kind of peaceful setting, it immediately tells you something profound and terrible happened.
Right, and the story that came out right after, it sounded simple enough. The Andhra Pradesh Red Sanders Anti-Smuggling Task Force, the RSESTF, they said they'd intercepted smugglers. Job done.
A successful operation, that was the headline.
Yeah.
But, well, like often happens, that official story, it's not the whole story, not even close, really.
That's what we're digging into today. Because behind that headline, there's a decade of grief, unanswered questions, and families fighting for, well, for justice.
We're peeling back that official layer to look at the other side, the victims, the families, the systemic problems that led to that night.
Yeah, because the big question, the one that just hangs there, is, were these men really dangerous criminals attacking officers? Or were they desperate people caught up in something huge and exploitative, driven by poverty?
That's the crux of it. And for you listening, if you want to get a real handle on this, not just the surface story, that's what this deep dive is all about. We'll try to make sense of it.
So the RSASTF, their initial report, what did it actually claim happened?
They claimed their patrol came across maybe 20, 25 men. Smugglers, they said. And according to the task force, these men weren't just there, they attacked with stones, axes, sickles. That was the claim.
Okay, so an attack by a large group with weapons.
Right. And the task force said they had to fire back. Self-defense. That was the justification.
But then the autopsy started coming out, and they told a very, very different story.
Yeah, a disturbing one. The men weren't just shot. They were hit by high-caliber bullets. We're talking AK-47s, SLRs, carbines, military-grade stuff.
Not exactly a standard police issue for dealing with stone throwers.
Not at all. And the wounds, often close range, targeted, vital organs. It didn't sound like suppressing fire in self-defense. It sounded different.
And what about those alleged weapons the smugglers had, the axes and sickles?
Well, that's another major point where this story starts to fray.
Yeah.
The National Human Rights Commission, the NHRC, they investigated, and they found no axes, no sickles, nothing like that at the scene.
No axes, no sickles. So what was left? Stones.
Stones, yes. But the NHRC questioned whether stones, against armed police could really be considered a lethal threat justifying that kind of firepower. It seemed unlikely.
And then there's this detail that just leaps out. The RSASTF officers, how many were injured in this supposed attack?
Zero.
Zero injuries.
Not a single one reported. Think about that. An alleged attack by over 20 people, supposedly armed, and not one officer gets hurt.
It really strains belief, doesn't it? 20 dead on one side, zero injuries on the other.
Exactly. And that massive discrepancy, that's what immediately made people suspicious. Activists, the NHRC, they started using the term fake encounter.
Explain what that means in this context. A fake encounter.
It basically means a staged event. Law enforcement claiming self-defense, when actually it might have been a pre-planned killing. Extrajudicial. Outside the law.
And the NHRC pointed to what they called irregularities. Things just weren't adding up.
Significant irregularities, yeah. The physical evidence didn't match the official narrative. Not at all.
So who are these 20 men? Not just numbers, right? They had lives, families.
Absolutely. They were primarily from tribal communities in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
Places like Tiruvannamalai, Dharmapuri, Salem, often very poor areas.
Inner backgrounds. They weren't exactly kingpins.
Far from it. You had people like Murugan. He was a painter. Had a wife, Thanjamal, a little girl, Kumatha, just trying to make ends meet.
Or Hare Krishnan.
A farmhand. Sole provider for his wife, Maliga, and their 2 kids.
And Sekar. His wife Lakshmi was pregnant when he was killed.
Yeah. These were daily wage guys.
Yeah.
Painters, farm laborers, living hand to mouth. Poverty was the constant backdrop to their lives.
Which makes that label dangerous smugglers feel so jarringly wrong.
It's a complete mismatch, isn't it? The economic reality versus the image pushed by the authorities. How does a poor painter suddenly become part of a gang attacking armed police?
It points to desperation, doesn't it? What else drives someone to take such risks?
Exactly. Which brings us to the stuff they were supposedly smuggling. Red sandalwood, often called red gold.
Why red gold? What's so special about it?
Well, first, it's incredibly rare. It only grows in very specific pockets of Andhra Pradesh, like the Seshachalam Hills. You basically don't find it anywhere else.
Okay, rare and valuable.
Hugely valuable, especially internationally.
Yeah.
China, Japan, Southeast Asia. They prize it for high-end furniture, traditional dowries, even medicine.
So big money involved.
Massive money. We're talking like 25 to 50 lakh rupees per ton. That's a lot.
And how does the smuggling actually work? Where do guys like Murugan fit in?
They're right at the bottom, the most dangerous part.
Yep.
They're hired cheap, maybe 500, 1,000 rupees for a trip, which is nothing compared to the final value.
For doing what exactly?
The hard, risky labor, cutting the trees down illegally, hauling these incredibly heavy logs through difficult forest terrain, often at night, getting them to transport points.
While the big bosses stay safe.
Absolutely. The organizers, the financiers, the well-connected people pulling the strings, they make the real profit and face almost none of the risk. It's a classic exploitation structure. These laborers are seen as expendable.
And the scale of this trade.
Yeah.
It's huge, right? Even with police efforts.
Oh, enormous. Back in 2015, the year of the encounter, authorities seized something like 1,200 tons, worth over 2,000 crore rupees.
Wow. And that's just what they caught.
Exactly. It shows how much is getting through. Despite task forces, despite seizures, the smuggling continues because the demand and the profits are just so high.
And the forest itself, what's the impact been there?
Devastating. It's estimated that since the 90s, maybe over 80% of the red sandalwood in Seshachalam has been cut down illegally.
80%.
Yeah. It's pushing the species towards extinction. And it messes up the whole ecosystem, obviously. This environmental crisis is partly why the government created the RSASTF in the first place.
Right, the task force. Their mandate was basically stop the smuggling, whatever it takes.
At all costs seemed to be the underlying message. Which brings us back to that night.
So let's revisit their story one more time. They find men cutting trees.
They allege an attack with lethal weapons, the stones, the phantom axes, and sickles.
And claim they fired purely in self-defense.
That's the official line. But again, you stack that against the NHRC findings.
No axes, no sickles recovered. Stones as questionable lethal weapons.
Right, and the injury count. 0 for the task force.
Versus multiple close-range fatal gunshot wounds for the 20 men. Often to vital organs, some possibly shot while down or running away.
It doesn't align. It doesn't make sense as a straightforward self-defense scenario.
Which is why the NHRC called for a much deeper probe, citing those irregularities.
And why activists didn't mince words, calling it a fake encounter. A staged killing disguised as a firefight.
What was the immediate aftermath like for the families? How did they even find out?
Horrifically. Often not through official channels. Maybe a neighbor heard something, saw it on the news. Imagine the shock, the trauma. For Tanjamal, Maliga, the pregnant Lakshmi, their worlds just collapsed.
And beyond the grief, they faced immediate hardship.
Total financial ruin, pretty much overnight. And the stigma. Suddenly they were the families of smugglers, social outcasts in their own communities.
Did the government offer any help? Compensation?
The Tamil Nadu government announced Rs 2 lakh per family. Which isn't a huge amount, but something.
But did they actually get it?
That was the problem. Some did, eventually. Some got partial amounts. Many others got tangled in bureaucracy, paperwork, and received nothing. It was messy and inconsistent.
And the NHRC, did they speak to the families?
Yes. They visited in May 2015, about a month after. They took statements. You had women like Sanjamal and Maliga pleading, saying their husbands weren't criminals, just poor laborers looking for any work they could find, begging for justice.
And 10 years on, has there been any justice, any accountability?
That's the really difficult part. Essentially, no. No arrests of the officers involved, no convictions. The legal process seems stalled or maybe just stopped. 10 years, nothing.
And the families, how has this decade impacted them?
It's been incredibly hard. Ruigan's daughter, Kumatha, had to drop out of school. The family couldn't afford it anymore.
And Sikar's son.
He's grown up without a father, asking questions no one can properly answer. The stigma affects everything, jobs, marriage prospects for the children later on. It's a long shadow.
This whole incident, it feels like more than just one tragic event. It points to bigger problems.
Oh, absolutely. It shines a harsh light on the systemic poverty in those tribal communities in Tamil Nadu. Landlessness, low literacy, lack of access to basic government support. It creates this deep vulnerability.
Makes them easy targets for exploitation.
Exactly. When you have no land, no stable job, no safety net, the lure of quick cash, even for dangerous work like smuggling, becomes almost irresistible for some. It's a choice born of having no other real choices.
Is there legislation meant to protect these communities, their rights to the forest, for instance?
There is. The Forest Rights Act of 2006 was specifically designed for that, to give tribal communities legal rights over their traditional forest lands and resources.
So has that helped in Tamil Nadu?
Shockingly, no. Its implementation there has been, well, practically non-existent. As of 2025, apparently 0 community forest rights titles had been issued in the entire state.
0.
0. So these communities remain legally unprotected without recognized rights to the resources they depend on, making them even more reliant on precarious, often illegal work. It directly feeds into the smuggling problem.
And these encounters, as they're called, this isn't unique to Seshachalam, is it?
Sadly, no. Extrajudicial killings, often framed as encounters, are a persistent issue across India. Marginalized groups are disproportionately victims. And Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, they have particularly high rates historically.
And the RSASTF itself, does it have a history?
It does. There have been numerous deaths linked to their operations over the years, raising ongoing questions about their methods, their training, and the lack of accountability.
We also need to think about the forest, the Seshachalam forest itself. It's a victim here, too.
That silent one, yeah.
Yeah.
The environmental cost is huge. That figure we mentioned, possibly only 20% of the original red sandalwood trees remaining. It's an ecological disaster in the making.
Have attempts to stop the smuggling worked environmentally, like building barriers?
They've tried things, yeah. Like the Great Trench of Seshachalam, literally a huge ditch dug to stop vehicles. But often these measures have knock-on effects, like disrupting wildlife movement, without fully stopping the determined smugglers.
It's a grim parallel, isn't it? The way the forest is stripped for profit and the way the poorest people are used and discarded in the process.
It really is. Exploitation on multiple levels. And yeah, the RSTF makes seizures, but the trade finds ways to continue. The core drivers, poverty and demand, haven't gone away.
So, 10 years later, what are the lives of the widows like now? Thenjamal, Maliga, Lakshmi.
It's a continued struggle. Thenjamal, Murugan's wife, works as a domestic helper. Maliga, her Krishnan's wife, sells vegetables. Lakshmi, Sekhar's widow, survives on a small widow's pension. They're just getting by day to day.
And the children, Kumatha, Sekhar Jr.
Their paths have been altered forever. Kumatha's education aspirations were cut short. Sekhar Jr. lives with the absence of his father and the difficult legacy. The stigma persists.
Was there any real rehabilitation support beyond that initial, often patchy compensation?
Largely, no. The promises of proper housing, education support, sustainable jobs, for most families, that never really happened. The initial money, if they got it, was often used up just surviving.
Okay, so looking forward, if we don't want tragedies like this repeated, what needs to change? It feels overwhelming.
It does, but there are pathways. First, tackling that root cause. Poverty, real investment in education, healthcare, decent jobs in those tribal areas. That's fundamental.
And the Forest Rights Act.
Absolutely critical. Implement it properly. Give communities legal rights and a stake in protecting their own forests. Empower them. That changes the dynamic entirely.
What about policing? The task force.
Police reform is essential. Better training, focus on de-escalation, not just lethal force. And crucially, real independent accountability when things go wrong. Impunity can't continue.
And the smuggling itself, how do you stop that?
The focus needs to shift. Go after the kingpins, the organizers, the ones making the millions, not just the desperate guys hired for a few hundred rupees. Disrupt the networks from the top down. Seize the assets.
And for the families who've already suffered.
Meaningful long-term support, not just a one-off payment. Help with education, livelihoods, healthcare. Help them rebuild their lives with dignity. It's a moral obligation, really.
As we wrap up, it feels so important to remember those 20 men, not just as statistics or labels like smugglers.
Absolutely. They were individuals, fathers, husbands, sons, caught in desperate circumstances. Their humanity needs to be front and center.
And the fight for justice for their families isn't over. They deserve answers, accountability, and a chance to heal.
Yeah. And this whole Seshachalam incident is a microcosm of bigger issues in India, isn't it? Poverty, marginalization, how power operates, who gets protected and who doesn't.
It forces you to look critically at official stories, to ask the hard questions, and demand better.
Definitely. It's a call to pay attention, I think. Because maybe, just maybe, if we learn from tragedies like this, if we address those deep systemic issues, we can actually build a future where this kind of thing doesn't happen again, where life is valued more than profit or statistics.